It's the Productivity Commission. It's like going from the water 10 feet high and rising to a drought. The economy will transition from producing 80 megatons of greenhouse gas emissions now to none in 35 years. And Bernard Hickey makes the point today on Newsroom Pro that New Zealand has increased its emissions by 15 megatons or 24% over the last 25 years. That's a big ask. That's an industrial and social upheaval, isn't it?
Yes, and I don't know how they're going to do it other than planting 1 billion trees.
Well, that's partly how they...
Well, that is part of the plan.
That is part of the plan, but, they're going to have trouble planting those 1 billion trees, in my view. But
when we build all these houses in Auckland, are we going to have the solar-powered roof tiles?
No, we're going to have trees growing up through them.
No, I mean, quite seriously, why not?
Absolutely, of course. Yeah.
This is something that is being done overseas, and to a large extent, people are having a lot more solar incorporated into the house design, not just panels on the roof, but the actual roof tiles are solar.
I must go to Anne Stevens before we go. The strange case of the Dunedin curtain inspector.
Can't wait for this.
Who inveigled himself into a student flat on the pretext of inspecting the window furnishings. So he works for a carpet company. He's got no known curtain expertise. Walking past a student flat in Duke Street, saw the occupants were home, decided to offer them a free curtain check, he said. Examined each room because he could see the curtains were skew whiff from the street. Dunedin barrister Anne Stevens joining us on the panel. Hello, Anne.
Good afternoon. This is the silliest thing you've ever rung me about.
I think so. Look, if you are freely admitted to a house, but on false pretences, is it always criminal?
No. The people may just be foolish.
Foolish.
I've never heard of a curtain inspector, have you?
No.
We have now.
Well, yes.
There are some very dodgy curtains around, obviously.
There's curtains that need instant inspection. And if you weren't pretending that you'd been sent by the landlord, which he may have been, it's not clear, but you nevertheless offered to come and inspect someone's curtains because you had expertise, when in fact you did not.
Yes, well, he decided to offer them a free curtain check.
Yes.
What would you think that was?
Well, then...
I think it's just as peculiar to let him in as it is for him to try and do it.
And why would it take him more than a minute to say, yes, I see you have curtains, they're drawn, or if he was a curtain inspector?
But the judge says, I have no doubt really, in your mind you were entering the house with some kind of dishonesty in mind. I can't put my finger exactly on what it is.
What a poor judge having
said the judge.
Well, that's fairly that's a fairly radical conclusion to draw. It's clearly based on the defendant, Mr. Gray's history, because he has a history of theft and burglary. But if they had been able to establish that he intended to commit a crime of theft when he went in the house, they would have charged him with burglary.
Right.
Because you can get in lawfully, but if your intention is to do something unlawful in there, then your ongoing presence in the house makes it unlawful that you're there. Do you follow me?
I do.
So they would have laid burglary if they could. They clearly do not know what he was doing in the house. I don't know if Mr. Gray knows what he was doing in the house, but
yes.
He was in there and it was unlawful.
Yes, neatly summed up. Anne Stevens, thank you so much for joining us. And Alan Blackmore, Blackman, what did I say that for? And Claire DeLaw, I was trying to rhyme with
There we go.
On the panel, thank you both. It's Friday.
Thanks, Jim.
Have a nice weekend.
Yeah, and same to you, everybody, and we're back on Monday.
Tō maira e hoa mai he kōrero kei te haere, he kaupapa kei te karawhiua. It is indeed Friday, and tonight on Checkpoint, historic images from Korea. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un steps into South Korea to shake hands with President Moon Jae-in at the start of a landmark peace summit. We have the latest from there. The Met Service warns another storm bringing heavy rain is on the way for Coromandel Bay of Plenty and Auckland. Some severe gales coming with it. Former actor Bill Cosby could die behind bars after being found guilty today of drugging and sexually assaulting a woman 14 years ago. It's been dubbed a war on the poor. A proposed levy on petrol vehicles to subsidise electric vehicles gets a number of thumbs down. And the Metro Sports Facility in Christchurch, what will it be?
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Batten aho. The government is flagging changes to the list of high-risk industries that require workplace health and safety representatives. This is the list from which agriculture was excluded by the previous government, but which included worm farms. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
There was a fair amount of controversy when the previous Workplace Relations Minister Michael Woodhouse defended agriculture's omission from the list, despite that sector's high number of deaths and injuries. The current Minister Ian Galloway says it's reasonable to expect genuinely high-risk sectors to be on the list, and changes to it are likely. The Minister has also released a discussion document aimed at improving health and safety laws. The public have until June the 8th to give feedback. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
The first summit between North and South Korea in more than 10 years is underway in the demilitarised zone between the two countries. The ABC's Jake Sturmer reports on the historic meeting between Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in.
With a smile, Kim Jong-un strode into South Korea, marking the first time a North Korean leader has crossed the demarcation line. Moon Jae-in greeted the North Korean leader warmly with a handshake and in a surprise move agreed to step over for a photograph of the pair together on the north side. Through an interpreter, Kim Jong-un says he looks forward to having good talks.
And we should meet as often as possible.
The word denuclearisation did not come up in the address of either leader, but it's expected the pair will discuss the issue.
Jake Sturmer with that report. The mother of a man killed when the car he was in crashed at high speed has told the man responsible her world has been changed forever. 35-year-old Cameron Thomas has been sentenced in the High Court in Hamilton to 6.5 years in prison, with a minimum period of 3 years and 3 months. Shane Hoheper, who was 27, died in the crash in Cambridge last September. His mother, Janine Hoheper, addressed Thomas in court today.
If you had listened to the passengers and stopped the car, my son might still be here today. But no, you didn't listen to your friends. You didn't listen to them when they were screaming at you to stop.
Janine Hoheper says with time her whānau will heal, but they'll never forgive what Thomas did. The father of a baby kidnapped last year says the 7 hours he and his wife were without her were the worst of their lives. In the High Court in Auckland today, Sydney Shauna Tōlapapa was discharged without conviction for her role in the kidnapping. Last August, she took the 11-day-old, believing it was the child of her cousin, who was the couple's nanny. The father told the court he woke to find the baby girl gone, and after a frantic search, he checked their CCTV.
Like watching something from a horror movie, I saw a female wearing a balaclava creeping up our back steps, peering through the window and slowly opening the back door as to not make a sound. As she crept back down the stairs and around the front, I could see her use a remote control to open the sliding gate.
The father says he and his wife now don't trust many people with their child. The disgraced American comedian and entertainer Bill Cosby is to appeal against his conviction for sexual assault. A Pennsylvania jury has found the 80-year-old guilty of drugging and assaulting Andrea Constand at his home in 2004. The lawyer for the other women who say Cosby assaulted them, Gloria Allred, gave this response to the verdicts.
Finally, we can say women are believed, and not only on #MeToo, but in a court of law where they were attacked, where they were smeared, where they were denigrated, where there were attempts to discredit them, and after all is said and done, women were finally believed, and we thank the jury so much for that.
Gloria Allred. Cosby's lawyer, Tom Mesereau, says he'll fight today's verdict. The police are investigating a serious assault involving gang members at Auckland City Hospital early today. 2 people are being treated for their injuries. The police say they're assisting security staff as a precautionary measure and to provide reassurance to hospital staff. They'd like to hear from anyone who may have information about the assault. It's 5:04. To sport, and the former world golf #1, New Zealand's Lydia Ko finds herself in unfamiliar recent territory. She's in the lead after the opening round of the latest LPGA tournament in San Francisco. Chasing her first tour win since July 2016, Ko's in a 5-way tie for first, sitting at 4 under par. She says the Lake Merced course can be particularly tough in the wind, so she's pleased with her effort.
Hit a lot of greens, so I was giving myself as many opportunities for birdies, and it's a golf course where nobody goes super low, so you just have to keep continuing to play solid and be patient out there, and sometimes par is not a bad score.
Lydia Coe. The Hurricanes will ease back into the Super Rugby competition tonight after a bye week when they host the winless Japanese side, the Sunwolves, in Wellington. The Hurricanes have lost just once so far this season, but coach Chris Boyd maintains the Sunwolves are a better side than their record suggests.
They've leaked a few points, but they're a really, really quality attacking side. So, we have a motivation to keep our standards, particularly at home in our stadium. So, and the team that we've picked, I think, reflects the fact that all of these games are tough.
Chris Boyd. The former Kiwis Rugby League coach David Kidwell has been appointed assistant coach of the struggling Parramatta Eels for the rest of the NRL season. Parramatta are currently last in the 16-team competition. That's the news.
Tonight on Night's Country Life has another look at the labour shortage hitting the horticulture sector. Tonight, it's kiwi fruit. Our something for the weekend is a whitebait habitat workshop on the Hauraki Plains because it pays to help breed them if you want to eat them next spring. And we have a sonic tonic dedicated to tea, so why not tune in for a cuppa after the news at 7.
And on Lately at 10, we feature Kiwi Rules. The famous and the infamous introduce us to a new New Zealand artist. We'll have an eye not only on music, but books, people and politics, keeping you up to date with the world at the other end of the day and bringing you breaking news as it happens. That's Lately with Karen Hay, on Nights with Brian Crump on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel Bay of plenty in Taupō. A few light showers today. Rain with heavy falls developing tomorrow morning and northeasterlies rising to gale in exposed places. For the remainder of the North Island, cloudy periods and the odd light shower in the west today, but fine in the east. Tomorrow, occasional rain spreading from the north in the afternoon and evening. For Marlborough and Nelson, mostly cloudy today with a few light showers. Rain developing tomorrow morning. Bulla and northern Westland, showers turning to rain this evening. Further rain tomorrow with heavy falls. Southern Westland and Fiordland, rain with heavy falls, clearing tomorrow morning. Canterbury, rain developing south of Christchurch this evening, then spreading elsewhere tomorrow. Otago and Southland, periods of rain, heavy at times, then easing to a few showers tomorrow. The Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the odd shower. It's coming up to 8 minutes past 5 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for joining us. 68 years after the Korean War began, more than a decade after the leaders of North and South Korea last held a summit, history is being made today in the demilitarized zone between the two Koreas. The DMZ, as the American troops there call it. Who knows what it all really means? There is so little trust, but the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and South Korean President Moon Jae-in have met at the heavily fortified DMZ to talk and to give their nations a heavy dosage of symbolism. Kim Jong-un's steps over the military demarcation line were pointedly historic as he became the first North Korean leader to cross into the south since the end of the Korean War. Remarkable. In a sign of friendship, Kim Jong-un gestured to Mr. Moon that they cross over to North Korea briefly, which they did for a few steps, then returned to the south, smiling and holding hands. Moon Jae-in praised Mr. Kim for making what he called a brave decision, while Mr. Kim said a new history begins now. The talks are focusing on trying to reach a deal to put an official end to the Korean War and convince Kim Jong-un to give up his nuclear weapons. With more on a historic day, here is the BBC's Andrew Plant.
A North Korean leader setting foot in South Korea for the first time since the Korean War, more than 6 decades before. Kim Jong-un shaking hands with the president of South Korea, the start of an historic meeting with international interest high in a secretive regime that's suddenly, seemingly, more accessible. This is where the two leaders are meeting, the border village of Panmunjom, between their two territories. The finest details already defined. They'll face each other across 2,018 millimetres of table, symbolising the year, and overlooking their meeting, a painting of Mount Kumgang, a symbol of reconciliation designed to reflect the summit's slogan, Peace, a new start. We should have a positive meeting, he says, and positive results. And going forward, we should be determined to meet more frequently, and then we can make up for lost time. The world's major powers will be watching. North Korea's nuclear program part of the focus. Kim Jong-un has indicated a willingness to stop testing. But will that translate to an end to its weapons program? Or is this part of North Korea's entrance onto the international stage as an established nuclear power? Proposed talks with President Trump could come in the future. A meeting with the Chinese leader has already happened. Today's meeting, the result of months of improving relations between North and South, two countries still technically at war. It will end with a tree planting ceremony. The delegates will then share a dinner. After years of increasing tension between the two countries, a relatively sudden softening, and many will hope a more open and receptive North Korea.
Andrew Plant, quite extraordinary if you're watching to see those pictures of the men holding hands, stepping over the line. The two men have broken for a lunch break, which they're having separately. Kim Jong-un has retreated back over the line to the north. They'll then take part, as Andrew Plant said, in a tree planting ceremony before resuming their talks and then heading to a banquet tonight. If you're wondering why the two Koreas are still technically at war, an armistice was signed at the end of the war in 1953, but it was a ceasefire and not a permanent peace treaty. We're going to go back to Korea in about an hour's time. Anna Fifield, an expat New Zealander, is there with the Washington Post covering it for that Augusta newspaper, and we will talk to her in about an hour for the latest on this extraordinary day. Thank you for being with us on Checkpoint. It is 12 minutes past 5. A proposal to put a levy on fossil fuel vehicles to encourage the uptake of electric cars is being panned by what may be an unlikely alliance of petrol car importers and social agencies. Green Party co-leader and Climate Change Minister James Shaw today suggested the levy could be used to help offset the cost of electric vehicles and mitigate New Zealand's emissions. But opponents say the move would disadvantage people on lower incomes, and they're the people who can least afford levies like this. Our reporter Robin Martin has more.
That's the gentle whisper of a Nissan Leaf pulling away from the curb, something the Green Party co-leader and Climate Change Minister James Shaw would like to hear more of. Today he floated the idea of a levy on petrol cars being used to subsidise electric vehicles and help cut greenhouse gas emissions. But the Managing Director of Merit Cars in New Plymouth, Paul Butler, says levies are draconian and would prevent many people from buying lower emission vehicles.
Every interference by government generally creates anomalies on the other side, pushes it harder for the poorer people to afford, or the lower income people to afford a quality and safe and economic car. They have to stay with the old stuff.
Mr. Butler, who has imported cars from Japan for 28 years, says he used to bring in electric vehicles but gave up on them after too many batteries failed.
They're not suitable for long distance travelling. They're only suitable for town and around or urban driving where you can plug in at night time. But if you want to go out of town distances, there's so many limitations and there's going to be so many problems with that that people haven't been told the whole truth at this stage.
The Chief Executive of the Strive Community Trust in South Auckland, Sharon Wilson-Davis, has her own beef with the levy proposal.
If you want to get families to be able to get, one step further ahead, that usually entails being in paid employment. Now, to be in paid employment usually entails you have a car. You have to have a car and you need to run that car. So I feel that this will just be another, obstacle or barrier to them getting off this bottom rung.
Ms Wilson-Davis says her clients are too busy struggling with housing costs and the basics of life to be worrying about electric cars.
I think a electric car in the scheme of things might be great in the big picture. But right now, for these people, electric car is the last thing on their mind. They've got to be able to face the hardships and the reality of their lives now, a roof over their head and being able to afford the vehicles that they do have.
For Ms Wilson-Davis, a focus on public transport would be more beneficial for her clients. Philip Brown, aka the Car Man, is a specialist electric car importer. He's not convinced that a subsidy is the way to go.
I'm not so sure that it's going to make a great deal of difference. There's so much inquiry as it is. You know, people are realising that this is the future. You know, every time we sell a car into a new family, they talk to their family and friends. They look at it, take it for a drive, they ring up and buy one themselves. So the market is self-determining, really.
Mr Brown said used second-generation Nissan Leafs are the best fit for the New Zealand market. He says they have overcome earlier battery issues and are not too expensive at between $18,000 and $30,000. Mr Brown says the biggest problem facing the sector is lack of variety and supply.
I think the government want 8,000 electric cars on the road by the end of this year. We're already at 7,000, so we're going to nail that target. But as the numbers increase, I think we're going to have trouble getting them out of Japan. So all that's probably going to do is force the price up.
Out on the street, there were mixed views on the levy.
Electric cars would be effective in helping the environment and global warming and everything, and I think it's a good idea.
Oh, I think it's not too great. I'd rather just keep drilling for oil and gas. Electric cars are great, and I mean, to be honest, we'll have to transit to that one day or the other.
I think the only thing we'd need to consider is how we were getting our electricity from.
Electric cars also have their own problems with the toxicity in the batteries and how long they last, and then what do you do with the batteries once they're done.
James Shaw says the levy is just one of a range of options being looked at to reduce New Zealand's emissions, and no decision has been made on its potential introduction. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Robin Martin-Aho.
5:16. A father stormed out of the High Court in Auckland this morning as one of the women who kidnapped his baby was discharged without conviction. Nadine Manukau Tongiavalu and her cousin Sydney To'olapapa pled guilty to kidnapping the 11-day-old baby girl from her home in Epsom last August. Ms. Manukau Tongiavalu, who was the baby's nanny, came up with the plot to kidnap the child and claim it as her own after faking a pregnancy for months. She coaxed her cousin, who was sentenced today, into helping her. Here's Sharon Brett Kelly.
The baby's father, who cannot be named, was emotional as he read out his witness impact statement.
I was woken up on the morning of August 9th to a parent's worst nightmare. Our 11-day-old baby had been kidnapped from our home.
He and his wife hired Nadine Manukau Tongiavalu as a nanny to help them rest and recover after a complicated birth. She had only been working for them for 3 days when their baby was taken.
About 7 a.m, Nadine burst into my room saying the house has been robbed. Quickly moving through the lounge, I could see the back door was open and our precious baby was not in her cot. The terrifying possibility that she was gone sent me into a panic, whereby I was trying to figure out and function in the horrifying reality that our baby was now missing.
After calling the police and conducting his own search, the baby's father says he remembered their home had CCTV, so he sat down to watch it with the police officers.
Like watching something from a horror movie, I saw a female wearing a balaclava creeping up our back steps, peering through the window and slowly opening the back door as to not make a sound. She exited the same door a few minutes later carrying some bags and the most precious thing to us in our lives. As she crept back down the stairs and around the front, I could see her use our remote control to open a sliding gate. And it was at this time I looked back down to Nadine and said, "Where's our baby, Nadine?" To which she replied, "I don't know." The look on her face, not knowing what we had captured on video, had me now convinced she was responsible and 100% knew who took her.
The court heard the woman in the balaclava was the nanny's cousin, Sydney To'olapapa, who pled guilty to the kidnapping last month. At her sentencing today, her defence lawyer, Annabelle Creswell, explained that her client had no idea what she was doing. She says Ms. To'olapapa's cousin Nadine, the baby's nanny, had faked a pregnancy months earlier. She had even held a baby shower. Nadine then told Ms. To'olapapa that she had put the baby up for adoption but now wanted her back. That's how she ended up helping with the kidnapping. Ms. Creswell says her client was just trying to help.
She still believed that the baby was her cousin's biological child when she entered the house, following instructions that her cousin had given her. And her intention was at all times to return it to her cousin.
Annabelle Creswell said her client should be discharged without conviction because at the young age of 19 she would struggle to find employment if convicted.
She is somebody who is gullible, she is too trusting, she was slightly scared of her cousin, and she's taken the steps that she's taken, really labouring under a misapprehension.
Justice Woodhouse said Miss Tulapapa's offending, although serious, was not on the same scale as her cousin, who had pre-planned the kidnapping.
One other thing that is apparent from those statements is that the parents are in agreement with my assessment that most of the responsibility for the great harm caused to them were the acts and statements, the deceit to them of Ms Manako Tongiavale. For all of those reasons, you will be discharged without conviction.
Before the sentencing was over, the baby's father stormed out of the court as Ms Tulapapa was discharged. She was ordered to carry out 400 hours of community work and pay the baby's parents $2,000 if they are willing to accept it. Nadine Manako Tongiavalu is yet to be sentenced for the kidnapping. For Checkpoint, Sharon Brett Kelly.
People reacting to Robin Martin's story about levies to encourage people to use electric vehicles. Why issue another tax, Mr Shaw? Silly. Why not be positive and make electric vehicles GST exempt for X number of years, says JK, 21 minutes past 5. Bill Cosby could die in prison. Found guilty today of drugging and sexually assaulting a woman 14 years ago. Cosby, who's been accused of similar crimes and of rape by dozens of women in recent years, now faces up to 30 years behind bars. The verdict is the courtroom conclusion to the public downfall of one of the world's most high-profile and at one time most beloved entertainers. Zach Fleming has more.
Justice has been done.
Emotional scenes outside a Pennsylvania courtroom after a jury finds actor Bill Cosby guilty of sexual assault.
I thank the prosecution, but I looked at that jury. There's this one young black man on that jury who I looked upon as my son, and I know the disappointment that he felt in looking at a beloved black male iconic father figure and being able to yet render a guilty verdict. I thank him. I thank all the juries, and this is a victory not just for Andrea Constant, whom I consider to be the Joan of Arc in the war on rape. It is not just a victory for the Commonwealth. It is not just a victory for the 62 of us publicly known Cosby survivors whom Gloria Allred has helped give a voice. It is also a victory for womanhood, and it is a victory for all sexual assault survivors, female and male.
Lily Bernard celebrating the verdict today outside court. Bernard guest starred on the 8th and final season of The Cosby Show and said Cosby offered to mentor her, but later drugged and raped her. Dozens of women have accused Cosby of sexual assault going back decades. And in this trial, 5 women, including Lily Bernard, were allowed to testify for the prosecution. Lawyer Gloria Allred, who represented 29 of Cosby's accusers, including Bernard, says justice has been done.
How many women does it take for one woman to be believed over the denial of one rich, powerful, famous man? And the answer in this case is 4.
It's a stunning downfall for the 80-year-old, once America's best-loved comedian, found guilty of 3 charges of drugging and molesting his former friend, Andrea Constant, at his home near Philadelphia in 2004. 45-year-old Constant said Cosby knocked her out with 3 blue pills and then molested her as she lay immobilized and unable to resist or say no. District Attorney Kevin Steele stood next to Constant after the verdict and said Cosby preyed on women for more than half a century.
He used his celebrity, he used his wealth, he used his network of supporters to help him conceal his crimes. And now we really know today who was behind that act, who the real Bill Cosby was, and a jury has spoken with one voice.
This is Cosby's second trial after a hung jury in his first trial last year. Steele argued against bail, citing Cosby as a flight risk. The court then listened as Cosby himself lashed out for the first time during the trial, calling Steele an asshole and arguing he didn't own a plane. Bail was then set at $1 million. Cosby's lawyer, Tom Mesereau, who was captured falling asleep during the trial, told media, with a defiant Cosby standing behind him, that he'd continue to fight to clear his client's name.
We are very disappointed by the verdict. We don't think Mr. Cosby's guilty of anything. and the fight is not over. Thank you.
Are you going to appeal, sir?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, very strongly.
Is Mr. Cosby prepared to go to prison? Andrew, can we have a word with Mr. Cosby? You prepared to go to prison, sir?
Cosby could face up to 10 years in prison for each of the 3 charges of sexual assault. The verdict's being hailed as one of the first major legal victories in the Me Too era, where celebrities are having their moments of reckoning around sexual harassment. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Vector is warning Auckland as more power cuts could be coming tonight and over the weekend, with a weather watch in place for the city until at least tomorrow night. The power supply says while repairing damage to its network in the days after the recent storm, workers reported hundreds of damaged or weakened trees, some on a lean, and large branches which are barely attached, therefore, of course, vulnerable to high winds. That brings the possibility for further power outages if gale force winds do eventuate. We wanted to talk to Vector about what Aucklanders should be doing to prepare and also the areas most at risk, but at 20 to 5 we were told the person we needed to speak with had gone home. So joining me now live is Met Service meteorologist Lisa Murray, who is still at work. Well done, Lisa. We're very grateful to you. What are we expecting tonight and this weekend?
Well, it's going to be a wet and windy weekend for many parts of the country, and quite prolonged wet, especially in the northern area. So across the north, we have a low approaching from the west. It's quite a complex system. The models aren't picking it very well, so there is an element of uncertainty. But what we do know with it is the likes of Northland and Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula and Bay of Plenty, they are going to see some decent rainfall there, and there's a wind watch for Northland and Auckland as well. A northeasterly direction this time, so different to the last event, but still some strong winds, probably reaching gale force for a time.
Okay, so the fact it's a nor'easter is good, because on the face of it, that means it won't be hitting the same areas that were damaged by the storm full force. Is that right?
Yeah, so the storm on April 10th came from sort of the west-southwest direction, and so this is a completely different direction.
Yeah.
But what we do find in Auckland in the past is that the northeasterly is actually a direction that they are prone to a few branches going and that kind of thing, because it's an unusual direction. So that combined with, as you say, loose branches already or debris that's still lying around, it could cause some problems. So we are saying to people, try and prepare as best you can. Check gutters and drains and make sure they're clear, tie down the trampolines, tie down anything that could basically move. It won't be those really gusty, really strong stuff that we had April 10th. It's a more persistent wind, about 100 kilometres per hour, but we could see some gusts stronger than that as well, especially those exposed areas. And at high tide, we might even see around that Tamaki Drive area, you could see some sea inundation as well.
Gosh, that's becoming business as usual, that sea inundation. Flooding, you don't think it's on the cards? The rain is not going to be heavy for long enough?
Well, that's interesting. We have watches out for the areas because it doesn't quite meet warning criteria. But what you will find, because it's over, warning criteria is 100 millimetres in 24 hours, but this is going over a number of days. So because it's over 2 days, the accumulations could be enough that you could see some surface flooding, you could see some small landslips, all those normal things that we see with heavy rain events. So I certainly wouldn't rule it out, and the best thing I can say to people is be prepared. You can see the updates for the next model run, and the expert forecasters will analyse this. They'll put the new watches and warnings up this evening after 9:30 p.m, and there'll be another update then tomorrow morning as well. So just stay up to date with the forecast. Met Service app have them, and the Met Service website.
Lisa Murray from the Met Service, we really appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed. So we need to point
Always
out...
lovely to talk to you.
Yeah, lovely to talk to you, Lisa. Thank you. And thanks for being available at the extraordinarily late hour of 29 minutes past 5. If there is someone from Vector who wants to join us, get some overtime perhaps, put in for some toil, do give us a call. You have our number. We do want to point out, though, that this doesn't look on the face of it to be as bad a weather event as the one we had earlier in the month. But, of course, as Vector was saying before they went home, there are a number of trees that are vulnerable and a great many branches that are not that well attached. It's 29 and a half minutes past 5, which sounds like sting time to me. Coming up on Checkpoint, the government says a scaled-down, less expensive metro sports facility in Christchurch will be open by 2021. We will be in our second largest city. For the latest on that, a petition signed by 114,000 people is presented to the Canterbury Regional Council calling on consents for 2 water bottling plants to be revoked. And 50,000 teachers march in Arizona for better pay. 50,000. We'd love your feedback. You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. We are, of course, on Facebook, where you can watch us too, as you can on Sky TV, Channel 83 and Freeview Channel 50. And our email address is checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Friday Night Business next, but Katrina Batten is here with the headlines.
The government says changes are likely to the list of high-risk industries that have to have workplace health and safety representatives. Agriculture was excluded from the list by the previous government, but it did include worm farms. The Workplace Relations Minister, Ian Lees-Galloway, says it's reasonable to expect genuinely high-risk sectors to be on the list. The mother of a man killed in a high-speed crash in Cambridge last year has told the man responsible it's changed her world forever. The driver, Cameron Thomas, has been sentenced in the High Court in Hamilton to 6.5 years in prison. Shane Horhepper died in the crash, and his mother told Thomas he should have listened to his friends and stopped the car. The father of a baby kidnapped last year says he and his wife no longer trust many people with their child. Sydney Shauna Tola Papa was discharged without conviction for her role in the kidnapping in the High Court in Auckland today. She took the 11-day-old baby last August, believing it was her child of her cousin, who was the couple's nanny. The father told the court the 7 hours he and his wife were without their baby were the worst of their lives. The latest review of the country's mental health system has today begun its consultation phase, where communities can have their say. This inquiry chair, Ron Patterson, says there's been a loss of direction in the 20 years since the last inquiry, and the way services are delivered needs rethinking. Professor Patterson says the terms of this inquiry are far broader than previous ones. The leaders of North and South Korea are positive about their first round of talks at their mutual border. The meeting is the first summit for the two countries in over a decade. The South Korean President Moon Jae-in says it appears that the North's Kim Jong-un wants peace on the peninsula. The police are investigating a serious assault involving gang members at Auckland City Hospital early today. 2 people are being treated for their injuries, and a spokesperson says the hospital is operating as normal. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6. I'm so blown away that it's actually on time that I can't think properly. Sorry about that, John.
That's all right, KB. I'm sorry we were punctual. It's such an unusual event.
It really is.
Yeah, 27 minutes to 6, and the 5:30 headlines were at 5:30. That happens about every 3 months, I reckon. Yeah, thanks, Katrina. Let's go to business news now with Emile Donovan, who is beaming in like the human embodiment of Sirius the dog star. Did you write that, Emile? Did you write that?
Yeah, I did. I meant to take it out. Sorry, I really dropped you out there, John.
I saw it, and I just thought, I'll read it. And anyone who wants to make a complaint to the BSA, do include Emile's name.
Well, now some people will know that Sirius the dog star is the brightest star in our universe. So, hey, it's all about public education, right?
It is, Emile, it is. Educate us on consumer confidence. It's fallen, but some economists are saying that could be a good thing.
Yeah, that's right. So this is from the ANZ Roy Morgan Consumer Confidence Index. They do one of these every month. Now, the headline is that confidence has fallen to its lowest level since mid-2016. But don't ask me why, John, because I don't know, and nor does ANZ, actually. There's no clear causational factor at all. We're just not vibing the economy as well as we were last month. Now, the good news, though, is that last month we were feeling really good about the economy. So, a slight down buzz is nothing to write home about, really. Most people are still feeling good about their personal financial circumstances. It's the broader economy that we're getting a bit worried about. Confidence in the economy improving over the coming year has dropped to plus 13% net. That's a 12-point drop from last month. But interestingly, and this is where we come to what you were talking about before, ANZ says this could actually be in the best interests of the country as a whole. The reason for that is household debt is really high at the moment. It's at about 160% of disposable income. And ANZ says lower confidence, a bit of gingerness, that could encourage people to start saving rather than, debting themselves up to the eyeballs for that new Lamborghini, which offers a bit of protection from the foibles of the economy should it turn on its heel.
Yeah, the other thing is that if people aren't spending, that is less inflationary, right? And inflation means higher interest rates, which whacks indebted households really hard. So that is another reason, I guess, that this is not necessarily a bad thing. But
did you used to be a business journalist?
Yeah, that was how I started at Radio New Zealand in 1873 as a business journalist, Emil.
It's like riding a bike, right?
Well, I'm fascinated by it, absolutely fascinated. Talking about fascinating things, Fonterra and its Chinese joint venture, which is a generous description of it. How's it going? It's standing by it?
Yes, stand by your Chinese joint venture, as the song doesn't go. So Fonterra has a partnership with an infant formula company in China called Being Mate. Now, Being Mate issued an audited report earlier today, and that shows it made a loss of about $167 million last year. That is a lot more than they were projecting. Their interim reports reckon that they were going to lose. That number is about 19 million more than they thought that they were going to lose. That sparked a bit of a trading halt because there were fears that the company could be delisted from the Shenzhen stock market. Fonterra says it's pretty disappointed by the result, but it is not going anywhere soon. It wants to stand by Being Mate and help it turn things around. So there you go.
Thank you, Emil. How did the markets end the week? I haven't clocked them at all today.
For the markets, well, the NZX 50, it was up 88 points. That's 1%. So it ended on 8370, and the dollar is pretty steady. It's buying 70.6 US cents, 93.5 Australian, and 50.6 pence.
Emil Donovan, thank you so much. Remind us before you go, Sirius the Dog Star is the brightest star in what?
In our
galaxy.
It's the galaxy.
Yeah.
I think it's the galaxy. I don't want to misinform you. You've turned up the pressure now, John.
Yeah, I have. Well, people will text 2101 if you know more about Sirius than Emil, but it's still a lovely detail to have. Thank you, Emil, and thank you for a fine week of work from the business desk in Wellington. Have a great weekend. Let's go to Christchurch, where the government says a scaled down, less expensive metro sports facility in the city will be open by 2021, 3 years away. This came as the Minister for Greater Christchurch Regeneration, Megan Woods, made various announcements in Christchurch today about the future of major sports centres in the city, including the stadium and the delay-stricken metro sports facility. But while the Mayor and Christchurch sporting groups welcomed the news, some were worried about more delays and, as always, cost overruns. Logan Church reports.
At the bottom of Christchurch's central business district is a 7-hectare dusty mud pit, which should have opened as a world-class sports facility 2 years ago. Last November, delays and a $75 million cost overrun prompted the incoming government to axe the current contractor and review the entire project. But today, the Minister for Greater Christchurch Regeneration, Megan Woods, says it's now back on track.
We've had our red pens out and our pencils very sharp, and we've examined the project line by line. Autakaro is now ready to go to market, find a good contractor and begin building the Metro Sports facility.
To do this, Crown-owned company Autakaro drew up revised plans that shaved about $50 million off the project. That means less architectural features, more affordable finishes, less skylights, reduced glazing, no childcare facility and a smaller car park. But that hasn't fazed sporting groups who would use it, including Canterbury Basketball's chief executive, Paul Duggan.
There was a need for more indoor courts, predating the actual earthquakes, but at the moment we have to run 18 courts on a weekend spread out over a large number of venues, which are very small, not full-sized in all cases. Having this come on board is just going to be really, really good.
Today, Megan Woods also announced that a detailed business case on the new Christchurch Stadium will begin immediately. She also wants the building to have a roof, something that sports groups and hospitality businesses say would bring more events, games and, more importantly, more tourists. Megan Woods says she expects this will require a bigger government contribution than the $59 million already committed.
I think it's pretty much an accepted given that the Crown is going to need to contribute to the stadium here in Canterbury, and that's why we'll be working with the council around it.
The Christchurch City Council's already committed $253 million to the new stadium, but the current budget only allows that to be spent from 2023. Christchurch Mayor Leanne Dalzell says councillors will discuss whether that can be brought forward.
I don't want to say that this is a slam dunk. We haven't made a decision to bring the funding forward, but what we are doing is we are considering that in the context of a long-term plan, which we've seen a number of submissions asking us to do that.
The former Minister for Greater Christchurch Regeneration, Nikki Wagner, also welcomed today's announcement, although she says it should have been made months ago, and she is worried about further delays and the potential for costs to soar on each project.
We're exactly where we were at the election time. In fact, I think we might have been slightly further advanced because we were committed to what they're doing, whereas they're rehashing it and rethinking it all over again. So this is what happens when you change government. You lose time, and we've lost 6 months on both these projects.
The government expects to announce the main contractor for the Metro Sports facility in the next 12 months, while a business case for a new stadium will get underway immediately. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, call Logan Church Tanay.
Well, we new listeners will tell us, the Sirius is the brightest naked eye visible star from Earth, which is a lovely detail. The person with the number ending 26 that texted us in could text us and tell us how long it takes the light to get to Earth. It's nice getting feedback like this. We have a highly educated and engaged audience, thank you. A man with a litany of crimes dating back 18 years has returned to prison after being sentenced for the manslaughter of a friend killed in a high-speed car crash in Cambridge. 35-year-old Cameron Thomas has been sentenced to 6.5 years with a minimum period of 3 years and 3 months. He's also been disqualified from driving for 10 years. Our Waikato reporter Andrew McRae was at the High Court in Hamilton for sentencing.
On the morning of the crash last September, Cameron Thomas had just been released from prison. He drove a friend's car at high speed through Cambridge, followed by police. At one point, after reaching speeds of about 130 kilometres an hour, he lost control, hit a parked car, became airborne and then flipped, killing his passenger Shane Hohepa and seriously injuring 2 others in the vehicle. He then attempted to flee from the scene. Justice Moore described what happened as appalling.
You were a disqualified driver. You drove when your breath alcohol level was twice the legal limit. You ignored the pleas of your passengers to slow down and stop. You were running from the police, and after the crash you failed to give proper assistance. These are all factors which contribute to my assessment that your offending is at the more serious end of the scale.
Justice Moore said Thomas lacked genuine remorse.
The effects of what you did that day were so utterly predictable and so utterly avoidable.
Thomas's list of previous crimes includes 3 of reckless driving, 5 of driving while disqualified, and 2 of dangerous driving. Shane Hohepa was the eldest of 9 children. His mother, Janine Hohepa, told the court the death of her son has caused anger, hurt and pain. She spoke directly to Thomas.
If you had listened to the passengers and stopped the car, my son might still be here today. But no, you didn't listen to your friends. You didn't listen to them when they were screaming at you to stop. You didn't stop when the police were chasing you. You did not stop. If you had stopped, then Fred and Brooke wouldn't have the injuries and they have today. And if you had stopped, I would still have my son with me today.
Mrs. Hohepa said her son had shared his home with Thomas and had been his friend.
I would truly like to believe that you didn't mean to do this, and I pray in the future you will remember this moment in time and stop before you do anything stupid like this again. In time we will heal, but we will never forget what you have done.
Justice Moore disqualified Thomas from driving for 10 years, telling him he'd been a persistent threat to other road users for the last 15 years. In Hamilton for Checkpoint, call Andrew McRae-Tanay.
The public has been given their opportunity to give their views on how to fix the country's mental health services, with many stressing the need for more community-based services. Labelled as a once-in-a-generation review of the mental health system, the inquiry was a key focus for Labor during the election campaign, as it criticised the previous government's record on mental health. Catherine Hutton has been in Palmerston North for the inquiry's official launch.
The 6-member inquiry team was welcomed with a pōwhiri at the Palmerston North Arena before hearing from police, district health boards, judges, mental health patients and community groups in the Manawa too. The panel will travel the country talking to and hearing from patients, staff and those in the community about the problems with the mental health sector and possible solutions to improve services. It's the 5th inquiry into mental health services, and the inquiry chair Ron Patterson says in the 20 years since the last inquiry there's been a loss of direction and there's a need to rethink the way services are delivered. He says the terms of this inquiry are far broader than previous ones.
We are very focused on people's ideas about what needs to change to improve how we deal with mental well-being for the community, but also with responding to people's needs when they have mental health challenges and problems with addictions.
Panel member Barbara Disley was the country's first mental health commissioner. She says this inquiry has a different feel to the one that produced the Mason Report in 1996.
We are now being asked to look much more broadly and widely at not only what happens when people are in distress and need the supportive services, but also to look at how can we stem the tide. What are some of the issues in Aotearoa that are actually contributing to poor outcomes for people, and what might we do in the future?
The inquiry has already held 50 meetings, but today marked the start of the consultation phase, which gives communities the chance to have their say. Mid-Central DHB was among those who spoke. Its chief executive, Catherine Cook, says the DHB covers an area 6 times the size of London, including Tararua, Levin, Otaki and Fielding. She would like to see a more coordinated, community-based approach that moves away from the medical model.
Working alongside our community, them being part of designing the solutions. That's not to say that everything in our current system is bad, because it's not, but we need to do better. There are too many people in this country that are experiencing the reality of living and not living well with mental illness.
Mati Roroma is the chief executive of Te Tehe Ororohene, the local Whana Ora Alliance. She also wants more community engagement and suggests amping up the role of the Mental Health Commission.
The Commission should have a broader scope than what it had previously, to include aspects that impact on mental well-being in other sectors like corrections and police and education and so on and so forth.
Professor Patterson says the need for more community engagement has been a strong theme from those they've already spoken to.
That we need more of a public health approach, that although it's still important that specialist mental health services that are provided from secondary care are there, ultimately the solutions are going to lie in our own communities, in our schools, perhaps in churches and social organisations, and also, of course, across other social services, not just the health sector.
An 0800 phone number and website have been set up to supplement the in-person submissions to the panel, which is expected to report back to the government by the end of October. For Checkpoint, Catherine Hutton.
Sirius is 8.6 light years from Earth. It is 26 times brighter than our sun. It is twice as bright as the second brightest star we can see from Earth. And lots of you are really into Sirius. Thank you. A petition signed by over 114,000 people was presented to the Canterbury Regional Council today, calling on consents for 2 water bottling plants to be revoked, despite the organisers admitting the action was largely symbolic. The petition asks the Regional Council to cancel consents which give 2 companies permission to take up to 24 million litres of water each day. Rachel Graham has more.
The consents were initially issued 20 years ago for industrial use of the water at wool scouring plants and haven't been used in about a decade. Genevieve Robinson says she initiated the petition because she was shocked that the council would roll over the consents.
In my personal opinion, I think it's a change of use, and I don't believe that because you've bought a piece of land off somebody that you have the right to use that. Yeah, you've got a hole in your piece of land called a bore, but it doesn't give you the rights to fundamentally what's underneath it. You know, it's a totally different consent process, and they need to work that out, really.
Aotearoa Water Action organiser Peter Richardson says the council has not done a proper assessment to determine the impact of the permits.
We don't think it's safe, we don't think it's sustainable, we don't believe they've done the assessments that would enable them to make such an assessment. We also believe that their process by which they granted those consents was flawed, and we want to hold them account and make sure they're following proper process when they deal with something as precious as Christchurch's water supply.
Mr Richardson says ultimately they'd like to change the culture of the council, which he says is focused on economic benefits, not community benefits. A crowd of about 50 supporters came to see the 114,000-strong petition being handed over. Many were particularly annoyed that the water bottling plants were taking the unadulterated water when they were being told the public supply must be chlorinated.
So the cows actually have pristine aquifer-fed water. Bottlers take it overseas for zilch, and either we buy the water off them or we have it in chlorine.
It's not so long ago we had water restrictions. It just doesn't seem appropriate, without even asking us. If there had been a public vote on the issue, I'm sure it would have gone against it, but there wasn't.
It's not very eco-friendly bottling New Zealand beautiful Canterbury water to send over to China, and it makes me really annoyed that we've got chlorine and stuff in our water and we just wrecked it. Enough's enough.
Peter Richardson from Aotearoa Water Action says he realises the council won't overturn the consents just on the basis of the petition. So the group have also launched legal action against the granting of the consents. He says that application is currently with the courts. The petition was accepted by the Deputy Chair of the Regional Council, Peter Scott, who said the council now needed to allow the court action to run its course. He also invited the petition organisers to make a deputation to the council on the 10th of May. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Rachel Graham.
Our last serious update, courtesy of our wonderful listeners, 8.6 light years away. A light year is 6 trillion miles, which kind of blows your mind, doesn't it, that the light you are seeing has travelled so far to be here. Tens of thousands of teachers are estimated to have walked out of the classroom in the US state of Arizona today, demanding better pay and more education funding, shutting hundreds of public schools as a result. Arizona is now the 5th US state in recent months where teachers have resorted to striking. Similar protests have happened in West Virginia, Oklahoma, Kentucky and Colorado. They're demanding 20% raises by next year, smaller class sizes and yearly bumps in pay until they reach the national average teacher salary in the US. That's $59,000. In Arizona, they currently average $12,000 under that.
The bottom line is funding for education. So a lot of people think it's just for teachers' salaries, and it's not. It's funding for the schools, for our kids. We haven't had the funding stopped in 2008 and has not increased. It's for our support staff as well. So it's for everybody. It's not what some people think just for teachers.
I taught the last 9 years without a raise. And in fact, my take-home pay went down. So yeah, it's absolutely imperative that we get this done.
Red for it! They were able to come together in West Virginia. They were able to work with some of the leadership in Oklahoma to move them to something better. This doesn't have to happen.
That was teachers at a protest in Arizona today speaking to Reuters, but lawmakers have only gone as far as a 20% salary increase by 2020, which has been rejected. The teachers say they will continue striking for as long as it takes to get what they want. It will be fascinating to see what happens with teachers and their negotiations in New Zealand. Feedback in from Christchurch, the Metro Sports Facility. Has anyone actually thought about the stupidity of the location? I work right next to the site and have for nearly 4 decades. We have a parking crisis of huge proportions at the hospital, yet we're now going to compound it with this facility. Even better news to hear they're going to downgrade its parking. Has all common sense left Christchurch planning and someone else on Sirius? Sirius is a double star. The very faint companion can be seen in a good telescope for the next 2 to 3 years. Says Pete. Thank you all for your feedback on. It's flooding in tonight. Stars are things you like, clearly, and why not? A home constructed entirely by Remutaka prison inmates was today lifted by crane over the wire, where it will be relocated to a needy family. The 3-bedroom house, which was built by 8 prisoners studying towards a certificate in construction trade skills, will become part of Housing New Zealand stock in the Hutt Valley. A crew from Britain's House Movers was on site from early this morning, working with a team from Titan, who set up a 45-metre plus crane to do the heavy lifting. The prisoners who built it are part of a group of 150 men who are gaining trade qualifications through Rimataka's building and construction program. Anne-Marie May and video journalist Rebecca Parsons-King were at the prison today to meet some of those involved.
Matthew, not his real name, is in his 8th week of plumbing training behind the wire at Rimataka Prison and says if he wasn't doing that, he'd just be sitting in his cell, so it's great to have something productive to do. He's currently learning to make guttering and says he's really enjoying the program so far and he can see the benefits of taking part.
A lot of these courses here are transferable. I come from agriculture background and I can use these skills wherever I go. It's free education and it's not only good for us, the prisoners, but when we return to society, it's going to benefit society as well.
I also met Jason. Again, we've changed his name for privacy reasons. He's doing a course in painting and decorating and is enthusiastic about what he's learning.
It gives me a meaning of getting out of the unit in the day. I'm achieving something out of it, and it doesn't interrupt with my other study because I'm also doing NCA, what's called a foundation skills with Open Polytech.
Curtis Scott is a Welltech painting tutor who works with the prisoners and says they're actually very similar to the young people he works with at the Polytech. He had some misconceptions of what it would be like to work in the prison, thanks to American TV shows, but says Rimataka is nothing like that. The men enjoy learning a trade and there's strong support from the corrections officers. Curtis Scott says it's great to see the prisoners developing as people.
We're giving them the skills of the trade, but not only that, it's the soft skills, it's the communication, it's working in a team, working with others from different cultures, that sort of thing. It's stuff that they can take away with them once they're released. They can reuse it in society and hopefully in employment.
The Corrections Chief Ray Smith says the trades program at Rimataka also makes the inmates very marketable in an economy which needs people who can do work such as building, plumbing and painting.
We placed 1,000 people into jobs directly ourselves. So on leaving prison, we managed to secure a job for them, so they went straight to work. So that means that the effort that is put in on the rehabilitation front is actually converted into something real when they leave, and that's been a very important development for us to have.
Today, the inmates were able to see their toil come to fruition as a house they built was lifted by crane over the Rimataka prison wire. The 3-bedroom home will become part of Housing New Zealand's stock in the Hutt Valley. The Education Minister, Chris Hipkins, who's a lecturer at the Prisoners' Inn, was also there to see the house moved by a 45-metre tall crane. He too sees real benefits in the prison's trade training program.
This is an opportunity for us to train local workers and at the same time ensure that they're less likely to be coming back to prison. They can come out from the wire, they can reintegrate back into society, they can become productive and useful members of the community, and they are a lot less likely to reoffend and end up back in prison.
As for Jason, the trainee painter, he says his mother is stoked he's learning a trade and has told him he can paint her house when he gets out of jail. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Anne-Marie May.
Anne-Marie May telling the story, Rebecca Parsons-King shooting and editing it. Lots of feedback's coming in on hybrids and electricity and cars, electric cars and the levies on them. John, we have a hybrid Mitsubishi Outlander. We regularly travel to live in where we can plug it in. We also driven to Auckland where we stay with Mum in her retirement village. She's on a second-floor apartment and we cannot plug it in to recharge. Ryman, Metlife et al. Need to consider charging points in their facilities, especially for family members visiting from out of town. I would not like to be without the hybrid option, says Leanne from Wellington. Leanne, I was driving over the Napier Taupo a couple of days ago, 3 days ago, whatever, and I noticed charging points in the middle of nowhere on the Napier Taupo. Quite a remarkable thing to see them there. I guess there are some cars with limited ranges, KB, you're nodding beside me.
Yeah, I've seen them all around the place. It's fantastic, actually.
Yeah,
Depends on how far you're travelling, of course.
Exactly.
But it's always nice to know where they are.
Yeah. Hi John, what happens with your electric car when you don't have any power to your home for 2 weeks, like in Auckland recently? Well, it would go flat, I presume. John, electric cars are not green. What about battery manufacturer and lithium mining? Kia ora, Checkpoint. Thank you, Jeremy. A levy on certain vehicles to encourage purchase of e-cars makes sense, but I think the target area is unfair. Far better to target new vehicles such as SUVs and utes, which have high emissions and poor fuel economy and are unnecessary except for towing and agricultural rural sector folk. And a listener we hear from quite often who has the most wonderful name, many of you do, I don't want you to think I'm playing favourites here, but a man called Richard Saint-Denis. Really and truly, he's stealing a bit of a march on the rest of us, particularly those of us called John Campbell. Richard says, I think it's simple. Electric vehicles should have low road user charges, which gradually increase over time. And Juliet says, electric vehicles, this is an interesting topic. My question is this: most of the cost of our roading is paid for through taxes added onto the base cost of fuel, i.e. petrol. Yes, of course. Electric vehicles do not contribute as there is no tax on their power. I would be interested in discussion or comment about this. Juliet, we will in fact get some discussion and comment on this subject, electric vehicles, and what taxes road users who use them do pay in the coming weeks. After 6 o'clock, we're off to Korea again with Anna Fifield, who's up there for the Washington Post, expat Kiwi. Quite extraordinary scenes as the presidents of North and South Korea went back and forth over that demarcation line, which has not been often crossed since the war began, 68 years ago. And Vector, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. We were moaning that we couldn't talk to them. Well, someone is fronting after 6. We look forward to it.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. South Korea says it appears the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un wants peace on the peninsula. A government spokesperson briefed the media after the first round of talks today between Mr Kim and the South Korean President Moon Jae-in. The pair are holding an historic summit in the demilitarised zone between the two countries. The spokesperson Yoon Young-chan says there have been very positive signals.
Mr. Kim said, I came here to end the hostilities and the conflict. That's why I came here.
The translated words of Yoon Young-chan. The leaders will meet for a second round of talks in the next few hours. The government is flagging changes to the list of high-risk industries that require workplace health and safety representatives. The Workplace Relations Minister Ian Lees-Galloway says the list is being reviewed and changes are likely.
That is the list that excluded agriculture and included worm farms, and I don't think that is a good example of the system being focused on what's important.
Ian Lees-Galloway says the changes will be announced soon. The government has also released a discussion document aimed at improving health and safety laws and is seeking public feedback by June the 8th. The ACT Party says the proposal to levy the owners of imported petrol cars in order to subsidise electric vehicles is a step too far. The Climate Change Minister, James Shaw, says it's one of several options being considered as a way of bringing down the cost of electric vehicles. But ACT's leader, David Seymour, says such vehicles are already massively subsidised because they're not subject to petrol tax and they get preferential treatment in high occupancy vehicle lanes.
The government already has a large number of incentives that encourage people to use electric vehicles. If those aren't working, then I think you have to ask the question whether it actually makes sense for people to be getting into them, or whether we should actually be waiting until technology improves and they become more affordable and longer range.
The ACT leader, David Seymour. A panel set up to review the state of the mental health system has heard calls for more focus on community-based services. The 6-member panel has met 50 times since January, but today marked the start of the consultation phase, which gives communities the chance to have their say. The chair of the inquiry, Ron Patterson, says the need for community engagement has been a strong theme.
We need more of a public health approach, that although it's still important that specialist mental health services that are provided from secondary care are there, ultimately the solutions are going to lie in our own communities, in our schools, perhaps in churches and social organisations, and also, of course, across other social services, not just the health sector.
The chair of the Mental Health Inquiry, Ron Patterson. An environmental lobby group says legal action will be required if 2 Canterbury water bottling plants are to be stopped from taking up to 24 million litres of water a day. A petition with more than 114,000 signatures opposing the plants has been presented today to the Canterbury Regional Council. A spokesperson for Aotearoa Water Action, Peter Richardson, says it realises the council won't cancel the permits on the basis of the petition, so it's also taking legal action. He says the consent process was flawed.
We would say that the applicants actually had to apply for new take and use consents just because of the way the Land and Water Regional Plan's written, the way the Resource Management Act operates. But ECAN, their view was that they simply had to apply for a use consent, and then they purported to amalgamate those consents, which we think is unlawful.
Peter Richardson says the application is now with the courts. State governments in Australia will be asked to support a plan to phase out all non-recyclable plastic packaging within 7 years. Australia has been having problems with its recycling since the start of this year, when China banned the importation of foreign waste. Some councils have been forced to stop all curbside recycling or to dump recyclables into landfills. The Environment Minister Josh Frydenberg says several options are being considered, including changes to packaging regulations.
The solution is to work cooperatively with the states to create new opportunities for Australia to build its domestic capacity, to get governments to procure more recyclable material, and to look at ensuring that all packaging is reusable or recyclable by 2025.
Australia's Environment Minister Josh Frydenberg. It's 5 minutes past 6. To sport, and Lydia Ko has finally found some form. The former world #1 golfer, who has slipped to 18th in the world rankings, is tied for the lead after the opening round of the latest LPGA tournament in San Francisco. Chasing her first tour win since July 2016, Ko shot an opening round of 4 under par. The Palmerston North driver, Brendan Hartley, admits he's got some catching up to do if he's to be competitive at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix this weekend. The Toro Rosso driver was down on the pace in the last round in China and failed to finish after being hit by his teammate. Having been in the race simulator preparing for Baku, he says he'd like to get back to the pace they enjoyed earlier in the season.
See, a bit of work for everyone on the team to understand why we had such an amazing pace in Bahrain, but not in China. And look forward to learning a new track in Azerbaijan. I love street tracks with some really tight corners there. Yeah, and hopefully get back that pace we had in Bahrain.
Brendan Hartley. The Cleveland Browns have used the first overall pick in the 2018 NFL draft to select Oklahoma's Heisman Trophy winning quarterback Baker Mayfield. And the billionaire owner of English football club Fulham hopes a deal to buy London's Wembley Stadium from the FA will be completed in 3 months. Shahid Khan, who also owns NFL side the Jackson Jaguars, has made an offer believed to be about $2 billion. That's the news.
Tomorrow morning, the self-described raging Amazonian feminist Professor Camille Paglia, who says the singularity of her view is because she is neither male nor female. Neuroscientist David Eagleman, best-selling author and presenter of the series The Brain. And Sian Davey has photographed her stepdaughter Martha as she goes through adolescence. The result is startling and moving. Join me, Kim Hill, tomorrow morning from 8 on RNZ National.
Met service weather now through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Waikato, Coromandel Bay of plenty in Taupō. A few light showers today, rain with heavy falls developing tomorrow morning, and northeasterlies rising to gale in exposed places. For the remainder of the North Island, cloudy periods and the odd light shower in the west today, but fine in the east. Tomorrow, occasional rain spreading from the north in the afternoon and evening. Marlborough and Nelson, mostly cloudy today with a few light showers, rain developing tomorrow morning. Bulla and Northern Westland, showers turning to rain this evening, further rain tomorrow with heavy falls. Southern Westland and Fiordland, rain with heavy falls, clearing tomorrow morning. Canterbury, rain developing south of Christchurch this evening, then spreading elsewhere tomorrow. Otago and Southland, periods of rain, heavy at times, then easing to a few showers tomorrow. And the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the odd shower. I wouldn't put your washing out tomorrow. It's almost 8 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint. Good advice, Katrina Batten. Thank you very much indeed and have a great weekend. You too, John Campbell. Thank you. Kim Jong-un has made history with a single step today.
becoming the first North Korean leader to cross the world's most heavily fortified border into the south since the end of the Korean War. Quite extraordinary. Mr. Kim stretched out his hand toward a waiting and smiling South Korean President Moon Jae-in, who stood between the buildings that straddle the border there. The dramatic meeting aimed at ending their decades-long conflict comes weeks before Mr. Kim is due to meet US President Donald Trump to discuss denuclearising the Korean Peninsula. We're going to go live shortly to Anna Fifield, who is expat New Zealander up there for the Washington Post. She is there. She will be able to tell us what's going on in about 10 minutes. But first, this report from Eve Johnson with Reuters.
Korean leaders made history at the border on Friday. Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un shook hands with President Moon Jae-in, kicking off the first summit between the two countries in more than 10 years. Kim then stepped across a military demarcation line, becoming the first North Korean leader to set foot in the South since the Korean War in the 1950s. Kim then surprised Moon by inviting him to do the same, posing for pictures on the North Korean side before crossing back. The meeting is aimed at ending a conflict that goes all the way back to the war and easing tensions over Pyongyang's nuclear weapons program. Kim stopped to sign a guest book at the venue for the talks, writing, "A new history starts now." The leader recently surprised the world by announcing he was dismantling the country's only known nuclear test site. But there is still plenty of skepticism among experts. Some question whether Kim is ready to abandon the hard-earned nuclear arsenal his country has developed and defended for decades. The neighbors are expected to release a joint statement on Friday that could hint at a strategy for denuclearization and peace on the Korean Peninsula. North and South Korea are still technically at war because the Korean War ended in a truce, not in a peace treaty. Meanwhile, the United States is watching the summit with interest. President Donald Trump has his own meeting with Kim lined up in May or June. The White House says it's hopeful that the talks will help create peace and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula.
That report from Reuters will be going live to Korea for the latest in about 8 minutes. The government is being warned that it will be the poor who will bear the brunt of any levy placed on imported petrol vehicles. The Climate Change Minister, James Shaw, says the government is weighing up introducing a levy, saying it could be used to help offset the cost of electric vehicles and mitigate New Zealand's emissions. Political reporter Benedict Collins has more.
You know, what we all know, right, is that electric vehicles are a lot cheaper to run because they're roughly about a third of the price per kilometre for the, electricity cost versus petrol. They're a lot cheaper to maintain because they've got fewer moving parts, but the upfront cost of the vehicle is prohibitive.
Now, that was Benedict Collins, sounding very much like James Shaw. In fact, it was James Shaw. We're not quite sure what's going on there. We thought we had a package from Benedict. Obviously, James Shaw would have been in it, but that was just James Shaw himself. So we'll try and work out exactly what's going on. And we will go back to that package once it is available. However, we are going to go to Vector now, who are joining us on the line, I think, and we are delighted to have them. Vector is warning Aucklanders they could be in for more power cuts. With bad weather looming, the power company says there are hundreds of damaged or weakened trees, some on a lean after the recent storms. That brings possibility for further power outages if gale force winds do eventuate. Now, we spoke to the wonderful Lisa Murray from the Met Service before, and she said the winds will be strong, but not as strong as they were. The point is, as Vector has told us previously, there are a lot of trees on a lean and a lot of branches not very firmly attached after the storms from earlier in the month. We're joined now by Vector's Head of Networks Programs Delivery, Minoru Fredricksons. Minoru, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. How bad are you expecting this to be? In other words, if the wind is gale force but no stronger, as the Met Service is predicting, are you worried about further power outages?
Yes, good evening, John. Yes, we're hoping that the winds will be a lot lower, but we do still expect there will be power outages as a result of it. If you look maybe back to the January storm we had there, probably slightly lower speeds predicted, and we had sort of 50 feeders out at that time, so we will expect some outages to come. And our big concern there really is those trees that have been weakened in that last storm, and with the wind coming from effectively the opposite direction, northeasterly. We've seen a lot of branches which are hanging off trees as you drive around Auckland. The risk there is they'll come down and go into our lines, and we'll have to go and clear those and restore power that way.
Okay, all power is restored after the last event, right? Everyone is back on.
Yep.
Okay, and that because the winds came from the west, it was the coastal westerly areas that were most impacted. Obviously, they're coming from a different direction this time, but you make a good point that branches that have been loosened and trees that have been pushed over but have survived may be at risk when the winds come from another quarter.
And indeed, and that's probably our biggest concern as what might come in the weekend. The winds are lower, but of course the trees can push in the other direction. Also with the rain that's predicted, probably loosen up the ground. So you may have some trees that are uprooted. Hopefully not. But the bigger concern is just those branches which have been broken, which will then blow off, just creating that the outages on the lines. Right, we're having this conversation on Friday night. Are you getting crews ready to go? Have you sort of got your emergency crews and everyone on standby if this should eventuate? We have. So we've gone ahead and cancelled all planned work this weekend. We've stood down crews. We've stood down people, including myself, to get a bit of a break before the storm does come or the gale force winds. In preparation for that, so we're as best prepared as we can be in terms of what might come. And is the app fixed? No. Obviously, we had some issues with the app. We've elected to kind of take the app down and direct people to our website to get updates in terms of what's happening and call through our call centre at 0508 Vector. 0508 Vector. And Minoru, one final question, and that is, what should people have if you are living in an area, and people will know this, which is prone to falling trees or falling branches or has had this experience before? What do you recommend people have at home? Obviously with torches, what do Vector say that people should have? I think the important things is try to get your mobile phone charged up. Have your torches and batteries to hand. Make sure your gas cylinder is full of gas so you can use your barbecue. Those are the basic constraints. And I think from a safety point of view, and that goes for our crews but also for the public, just be aware that if the trees do come down lines, please, not out of frustration, don't try to move the trees yourself, but wait for our crews to get there to make the line safe and then remove the trees safely. Minoru, we appreciate you joining us. We know this isn't your department, but the privacy breach around the app, is that why the app is not being put back up? Is that the issue you're worried about, or is it that it's just not working per se? That's one of the key reasons. Obviously, the breach is very unfortunate. We have fixed that patch, but as an extra precaution, we've taken the application down to make sure that we can make improvements and improve the customer experience going forward. Minoru Fredrickson's joining us from Vector. Thank you so much, and we hope that your emergency staff are not required over the weekend. We're going to go back to Korea now, I think. I'm just looking at Pip. No, we're not. We're going back to Benedict's package, and so I will just get the intro up. It's all over because of the events in Korea. We're moving things around a lot so we can get the latest from Anna Fifield as there is more stuff to tell us. Let's return to this story about levies on electric cars. On imported petrol vehicles, because electric cars are expensive and the government is looking to offset the cost of them to get more people into them and to mitigate New Zealand's emissions. We're going to return to the piece we didn't have before from Benedict Collins, and this time we believe it's in the House.
What we all know, right, is that electric vehicles are a lot cheaper to run because they're roughly about a third of the price per kilometre for the electricity cost versus petrol. They're a lot cheaper to maintain because they've got fewer moving parts, but the upfront cost of the vehicle is prohibitive.
And that's why James Shaw says the government is looking at the option of introducing a levy on imported petrol vehicles. Under the proposed scheme, vehicle importers would pay a fee for bringing in a car that runs on fossil fuel, or receive a rebate for an electric or low-emission vehicle. But National's transport spokesperson Jamie Lee Ross says the proposed levy would hit people hard at the lower end of the socio-economic spectrum.
It would effectively be a tax on the poor. You'd see the poorest New Zealanders who are purchasing second-hand Japanese imports having to pay the levy, which would go towards subsidising electric vehicles for those who are more likely to be wealthier and more able to purchase an electric vehicle.
Mr Ross says instead of the levy, the government should be following National's lead on electric vehicles.
I'd encourage this government to continue with what National did by exempting road user charges. I'd encourage them to continue to purchase more electric vehicles as a government, so the government fleet is full of more electric vehicles.
And ACT's leader David Seymour says a levy would be a step too far.
Now, the government already has a large number of incentives that encourage people to use electric vehicles. If those aren't working, then I think you have to ask the question whether actually make sense for people to be getting into them, or whether we should actually be waiting until technology improves and they become more affordable and longer range.
The Energy and Resources Minister, Megan Woods, recently bought an electric vehicle herself and says charging station infrastructure is being rolled out across the country so drivers don't get caught short.
We're at a point, obviously, within our main cities where people can very comfortably use an EV. They can charge it at home, they can do their daily travels and go home and charge it again. Where the challenge is coming is where people need to drive between cities, and that's why ECA have a focus on making sure that we have that spread of charging infrastructure around the country.
As of February, there were 124 public fast charging stations across the country. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Benedict Collins.
Let's return to this guilty verdict in the Bill Cosby trial. Of course, last year a jury failed to reach a verdict. This time, a second trial. The jury found the US comedian Bill Cosby guilty of 3 counts of drugging and sexually assaulting a woman at his home in 2004. Each charge carries a maximum penalty of 10 years. With Cosby, this is kind of representative of the universal and the particular, if you like. Up to 60 women have accused him of sexual assault, some of rape. But the statute of limitations has run out in many of their cases. Today they celebrated, saying Cosby's conviction is a great day for justice. Here's the ABC's North American correspondent, Connor Duffy.
Bill Cosby didn't speak to reporters as he shuffled ashen-faced from court on a cane to be pursued by news helicopters. Accuser Lily Bertrand, one of about 60 women who alleged Cosby assaulted them, couldn't control her emotions as she called it an historic day.
It is not just a victory for the Commonwealth. It is not just a victory for the 62 of us publicly known Cosby survivors whom Gloria Allred has helped give a voice. It is also a victory for womanhood, and it is a victory for all sexual assault survivors.
Cosby has been convicted of drugging and sexually assaulting a Canadian woman, Andrea Constand, at his home 14 years ago. Like other accusers, Constand alleged Cosby gave her a pill and sexually assaulted her while she slept. Ms Constand didn't speak but appeared at a press conference with local District Attorney Kevin R. Steele. It's a major victory for Mr Steele, who was elected on a promise to prosecute Cosby and succeeded on the second attempt after last year's mistrial.
What was revealed through this investigation was a man who had spent decades preying on women that he drugged and sexually assaulted, and a man who had evaded this moment here today for far too long. He used his celebrity, he used his wealth, he used his network of supporters to help him conceal his crimes. And now we really know today who was behind that act, who the real Bill Cosby was.
During both trials, Cosby's accusers were accused of being liars motivated by money. In this trial, another 5 women who accused Cosby of assault testified, and their cross-examinations were at times savage as they had their sexual history questioned in open court. Lawyer Gloria Allred, who represented a number of the women in civil cases, hoped it would be a catalyst for change.
It took a great deal of courage. In the beginning, many were not believed. We are so happy that finally we can say women are believed, and not only on #MeToo, but in a court of law where they were under oath, where they testified truthfully, where they were attacked, where they were smeared, where they were denigrated.
Another Cosby accuser, Victoria Valentino, spoke of the relief today's verdict brought to victims after decades of not being believed.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. We are vindicated, we are validated, and we are now part of the tsunami of women's power and justice. We are not shutting up and we're not going away. Get over it.
Outside court, Cosby's attorney, Tom Messerow, said they will appeal the verdict.
We are very disappointed by the verdict. We don't think Mr. Cosby is guilty of anything, and the fight is not over. Thank you.
For now, though, at 80, Cosby is bracing for a new reality, jail as a convicted sex offender.
Connor Duffy with that report. Let's return to Korea now, where it's been quite an extraordinary day, and we're delighted to say Anna Fifield from the Washington Post is covering the Inter-Korean Summit. And Anna, who is generously available to RNZ very often, Anna, and we're so grateful for it as an expat Kiwi now working for the Washington Post, is on the phone. It must be extraordinary to be there, Anna, is it?
Yeah, hi, John. It is extraordinary to be here and great to be on Radio New Zealand again. This is a very historic, momentous occasion in North Korea, South Korean relations today. Just to be sitting here and to watch Kim Jong-un, this guy that we think of as this nuclear-armed kind of villain, walking across the border that has divided the Korean peninsula for 65 years, smiling and reaching out to shake the South Korean president's hand. It was really a big moment, and even amongst the room full of cynical journalists, I was sitting and watching this moment. There were cheers and clapping from the Korean journalists who were watching this, because it's a very emotional moment for South Koreans and North Koreans when they can eventually see it. But it is a breakthrough that we could not have imagined even a few months ago, when it was all about missiles and total destruction of the Korean peninsula.
Yes, as you speak, and we have a photo up, or we did have a photo up, of the two of them holding hands as they stepped over that line. You can't overstate how important that image is. But setting aside the symbolism and the hope and the sense of possibility you feel when you see it, Kim Jong-un is also a man who is unpredictable, unreliable, and has no track record of going much further than this. So what are we to make of all of this?
Yeah, well, we can say that, the world has underestimated Kim Jong-un, thinking that he would not be able to keep control of North Korea and play in these big leagues around the world, but he really is. He is in the driving seat right now. It was his idea to attend the Olympics in South Korea, which paved the way for this. It was him who invited Moon Jae-in to this summit today, and him who issued this invitation to Donald Trump for a summit in the next month or so. So he is really in control of this. I think this is a sign partly that the Trump administration's maximum pressure policy is having an effect on North Korea. It is beginning to hurt. But more so, I think it's a reflection of the fact that Kim Jong-un feels strong. He feels confident. He has nuclear weapons. He has missiles to be able to send them places. So he is coming to these negotiations. Now, he is calling the shots because he feels like he is in a strong negotiating position and that he can win. So this idea that they're all going to agree on a denuclearization deal, I think is very far-fetched. I think Kim Jong-un here is trying to get some sanctions released because the sanctions are hurting him, and then he's going to want to string this process out as long as possible. But I do not for a second expect him to start dismantling his nuclear weapons and start allowing international inspectors in to check it, because these weapons give him so much legitimacy in the North Korean system, and they have acted as a deterrent to keep the outside world at bay. So I just can't see any security guarantees that he would accept for giving these up.
Anna Fifield, we so appreciate you being with us and giving us a kind of vivid flavour of what it's like to be there. We know you're filing furiously for the Washington Post, and we're very grateful for your time. Anna Fifield, expat Kiwi, who is up there. Remarkable to see those pictures of the two men stepping back and forth over that line. Speaking of Donald Trump, it was a case of long-time listener, first-time caller for the US president when he called into his favourite breakfast show, Fox and Friends, on America's Fox network today. What followed was a lengthy and wide-ranging, monologue, discussion, rant on a number of topics which seemed to be weighing on the president's mind. This report from CNN.
We have never had a sitting president of the United States phone us.
It was a remarkable television moment, a half-hour phone-in direct to Fox and Friends by the president himself. Mr. Trump covered a lot of ground.
This guy's going to get us into nuclear war.
On North Korea, he suggested the much-hyped meeting with Kim Jong-un might never even happen.
It could be that I walk out quickly, with respect, but it could be that maybe the meeting doesn't even take place. Who knows? But I can tell you right now, they want to meet.
He lashed out once again at former FBI Director James Comey, whom he fired last year.
Look, Comey is a leaker and he's a liar. And not only on this stuff, he's been leaking for years. He didn't write those memos accurately. He put a lot of phony stuff.
The president, in the phone call, also threatened to interfere with the probe into his campaign's connections with Russia.
They have a witch hunt against the President of the United States going on. I'm very disappointed in my Justice Department. But because of the fact that it's going on, and I think you'll understand this, I have decided that I won't be involved. I may change my mind at some point because what's going on is a disgrace.
Trump also weighed in on his lawyer, Michael Cohen, who paid $130,000 in hush money to porn actress Stormy Daniels shortly before the 2016 U.S. election. The president acknowledged for the first time that Cohen did represent him in the case.
He represents me like with this crazy Stormy Daniels deal. He represented me, and you know, from what I see, he did absolutely nothing wrong.
And in true Trump style, the interview felt like an extended vent, unfiltered, at times rambling, and anything but modest.
I would give myself an A+.
Donald Trump there, ending that report from CNN. The hosts of Fox and Friends, by the way, were forced to cut a seemingly reluctant Mr. Trump off. He was available for more, saying, and I quote, "We could talk all day, but it looks like you have a million things to do." Fox and Friends. First time caller, long time listener. Before we go tonight, big disincentive for electric vehicles, the lack of charging facilities whilst crossing Cook Strait on any of the ferries. Will Brewbridge or Inter Islander provide charging points on board? Good question. Stuart Gardner from Tokoroa. Lovely to hear from you, Stuart. Thank you. Vector app just not working. No message to say it's been taken down. Not directing users to Vector website. It just seems broken. Try it. Now, Vector told us before they have indeed taken it down. So if you are in parts of Auckland which are prone to power outages in big storm events, and this isn't going to be a super big one, but the city is vulnerable after the last one, do keep an eye on the Vector website if you've got access to it, rather than the app which is not working. Why is Vector not focused on undergrounding its lines? We want a greener city and reliable power, asked Brent. Yeah, well, we had this discussion with the Brent a couple of weeks ago, and it's simply that it is too expensive, they say. Thank you for your feedback and for being with us. We really appreciate your company. Have a great weekend. See you Monday.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A voice artist working for NZME has refused to voice an advertising script because the client wanted him to pronounce a Māori word the white way. The Minister for Workplace Relations says changes are likely to a list of high-risk industries requiring workplace health and safety representatives. The government inquiry into mental health and addiction begins its consultation phase today, amid calls for more focus on community-based services. And an environmental group has launched legal action over consents given to 2 Canterbury water bottling plants. Our next news and weather is at 7.
This year, apple harvesting was a nightmare for many orchardists. Seasonal labour wasn't around, and it's threatening horticultural expansion in New Zealand.
There's no doubt that tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of crop will be wasted.
The chronic labour shortages